Hi there and welcome to the fourth and final video on the Dream House. Today we're going to be discussing some messages and final thoughts from the novel. A lot of the things discussed today will reflect the themes video that was previously published, but hopefully there's a new measure of clarity and perhaps some new bits of information that might prove useful. So the first thing I want to discuss is the last sentence of the novel. There is an opportunity for one of them to speak, to say a few words that might help them to laugh the moment away, but each of them keeps their peace, and as the two drivers ease forward, they raise their hands and carry on. This is such an interesting conclusion to this novel. This novel has chronicled this eruption when Looksmart comes to confront Patricia about the past that he's endured and the injustice that he feels has been put upon him. Patricia's unable to reflect and to look back on the past with any sort of objectivity or from anyone else's perspective. And so Looksmart's desire for revenge is somewhat achieved, but also not achieved in the way that he'd hoped. And so the ending, I think you can see it in two ways. You can see it as a very bleak ending in terms of South Africa in general, but you can also see it as maybe a hopeful ending. So let's discuss those two options. Looksmart and Patricia's story is emblematic of a lot of apartheid and post-apartheid relationships, and I think that this is why we can see this novel as being really socially engaged and relevant in our society currently. So at the end we have this understanding that is quite bleak because these characters, they've confronted each other, but they're not actually able to dig deep enough to find proper reconciliation, to find an understanding of each other, and to be able to actually, interact with each other and to put certain things aside. So there's no sense of reconciliation on the one hand. However, on the other hand, we see there is a little bit of reconciliation. You can see it as some sort of progress, the fact that they're not fighting, that they can raise their hands and carry on. So there's no sense of that there's going to be a long-term relationship here. There's not going to be this continuing of this narrative of the two characters. There's the sense of a breakaway, that they've said their bit and now they can carry on. So there's a little bit of respect there, they raise their hands, but then they carry on. So it's up to you to decide. Do you think that's really bleak because there's no reconciliation or no proper reconciliation? Or on the other hand, you could argue that it is actually, it's progress. It's not ideal, but you can't erase the past. You can't get rid of it. So this is the best case scenario. So that's up to you to decide. But I think it's an interesting last sentence, which I definitely think you should remember as a quote. Obviously not the whole thing, but some parts of it. The next idea, which we did discuss in the themes video, was this idea of trying to take revenge. Looksmart tries to take revenge, but Patricia almost won't let him. And I think that's interesting because revenge is usually seen as a one-sided thing, and the Dream House points to this idea that it might be a two-person thing, that the person who is being, who wants to take revenge actually has to have someone to respond to that. And Patricia almost doesn't respond to Looksmart's desire for revenge because she just either decides not to confront the past, or she is unable to actually confront the past and to apologize sincerely for her actions because she can't actually recognize her mistakes. The IEB tends to ask a lot of questions or essay questions about the Dream House with this link to modern South Africa. So students need to comment on how this novel reflects modern South Africa or disagrees with modern South Africa. I would definitely argue that it is relevant in the modern South African context. And so some things to think about when we discuss this is this idea of post-apartheid South Africa with this strong apartheid legacy that doesn't seem to go away. there is still inequality even in 2021. There is still inequality. There are still unequal and unbalanced relationships, which I think is important when we look at Look Smart and Patricia, when we look at Patricia and Beauty. And these are all happening. This novel set in, post-apartheid times, but yet we still have these unequal relationships that are remnants from the apartheid era. So I think the race relations are very important, and I think also this idea of the past, because South Africa has this interesting relationship with the past, because yes, it's something that is frowned upon, and not just frowned upon, but that people are disgusted by to think about South Africa's history. But at the same time, when there was a transition of power, there was this great emphasis on reconciliation, on this idea of mending ties. So not forgetting about the past, but dealing with the past and moving on. And I think in 2021, we're grappling with that. Has it been successful or has it been unsuccessful? So that is something to think about and something to reflect on when you are writing about the dream house. And if you're a history student, I think you'll understand this a little bit better, because if you study the TRC, you can understand the processes that were involved in shifting South Africa to the democracy that we know today. And so the dream house, I think, to one extent illustrates the failure of this, but to another extent illustrates the triumphs of this progress. The next thing to discuss is the title of the dream house. I think it's quite interesting that the author decided to name this book The Dream House, because it's only like one element of the story, one sort of symbol. But I think it's important to understand that the dream house is a paradox. Well, in my opinion, it's a paradox, because the dream house is Patricia and Richard's house, which Look Smart lands up recreating across the farm. So he sees this house as being a symbol of his oppression, and yet he is recreating it all over. And I think this illustrates the paradox between, the hatred for the oppressor, but the mimicry of the oppressor in certain aspects, whether that's consciously or subconsciously. So I think that's a really interesting trope that is discussed in the novel. And I think a house is representative of a whole value system. So it's really interesting that Look Smart hates Patricia and everything that she stands for, and yet he is recreating the value system, or the house, which is the physical representation of that value system, of the life that she led. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about the idea that the reader sees the story from different characters' perspectives. So I know some people love this style of writing and some people despise it. I think it's really interesting when an author decides to approach a narrative like this, because they are indicating to us that this story is not necessarily linear, that this is not a story that is just objective. I'm not going to just tell you the story. I'm not going to paint a wonderful picture for you. I actually need you as the reader to think about what's happening. And this is a story that does require the reader to think. It does require the reader to grapple with the different characters' perspectives on the same events that transpired. It reinforces the subjectivity of memory, because we see the same memory being retold through different characters. And I think this shows us the complexity of the South African experience and of these characters, which represent so many different people who live in a modern South Africa. So I think that the choice to tell the story through different characters' perspectives was an extremely wise decision by the author, and I think it works really effectively to emphasize the subjectivity of memory, which is such a key theme in the story. Thank you so much for watching. Please see the link in the description for the PDF notes. I hope that these videos have been helpful. Thank you.